And welcome to Whiskey Politics at the Ricochet Audio Network and America's Voice News. I'm Dave Sussman, your host and the purveyor at whiskeypolitics.net, and I'm delighted to be here today with John Cox. John is running for the governor of not just the most populous state in the United States, but the fifth largest GDP in the entire world. The world. What is that? U.S., China, Russia, Germany, and then California?
Yeah, and we just passed Great Britain, the United Kingdom. So I would argue this is the second most important job in the country, right behind the presidency.
How does that feel, but wanting to manage the fifth largest GDP in the world?
Well, it needs help. That's why I'm doing it. It's not been managed very well, and there's a lot of people that are suffering because of it. So we're going to be hopefully talking about that.
Well, I want to get into a lot of these issues with you. One of the things that a lot of folks have spoken to me about, and we've got some questions from the Ricochet Audio Network I'm going to mention to you as well, is outside of California, a lot of folks and a lot of people outside of California are going to be listening to this as well. They have a genuine interest in what happens in California. What we've seen in the past 20, 30, maybe even 40 years is this primordial Marxist ooze that is just moving eastward from all of the social policies and actions that are taking place in California. What's happened to this state, this once golden state?
Yeah, and wouldn't it be a political earthquake for this to move across the rest of the country when I win on November 6th? You know, what's happened in California is somewhat of what has happened in other states, but because California is so large, it's really had a bigger impact. And that is interest groups have grabbed a hold of Sacramento to a large extent and are dictating policy for their own purposes. That's really the best way to explain it. I mean, how else do you explain the fact that we are 50th in business climate? We are 47th in school proficiency. We are the worst tax state in the country, the most people living in poverty, the most people homeless. Our gasoline, electricity, and water prices are the absolute highest. Our housing costs aren't just higher than the rest of the country. It's by a factor of 2.5 times. Now part of it is because California is just a beautiful place to live. It's got the best weather. It's got the best natural beauty. We have the best climate for growing crops. We are the fruit, nut, and vegetable bowl of the entire world. Forget about the United States. The entire world gets fruits and nuts and vegetables out of our Central Valley. So we have an abundance of riches, but it's being mismanaged because of the grab for power of these interest groups. And that's what I'm running against. I'm running against these interest groups. I'm running against a political class that has really thoroughly screwed up this wonderful place. And I think the people in this state are ready for that change.
Well, there's definitely some changes needed. I want to talk a little bit about John Cox, because a lot of people, most people, I'm a politico. I'm just ensconced in everything politics. I know you are as well.
Yeah.
A lot of people, they're turning the channels.
It's an affliction, isn't it?
It's unfortunate. But when people hear the name John Cox, they may not know a lot about you. I understand you didn't grow up in California. You grew up in Chicago, a single mother. Talk about that and your genesis to where you are today.
Yeah, a single mom with roots in California, though. She got 2 master's degrees from Berkeley back in the 40s. My older brother was born in San Jose. My mom got married in San Francisco in 1950 or something like that. Had my brother in 52. That marriage blew up, though. Her husband was an alcoholic, and so she had to leave and go back to her parents in Chicago. She had me. My real father, as I tell audiences, he took one look at me and left. Didn't want to participate in raising me. And
that was really young, right?
I was a baby.
You were a baby.
I didn't even know his name until I was a teenager. But listen, what doesn't kill you makes you stronger. I had to work my way through college. I had a struggle on my own. And frankly, Dave, that actually what I think helps me a little bit in this pursuit, because I understand what it's like to have to struggle and live hand to mouth and worry about, are you going to be able to pay the mortgage or pay the rent the next day? As you might know, my opponent really hasn't had that. His dad was very connected, and he's always lived a connected life to billionaires. And so, I think the fact that I've had struggles in my life, really gives me some ability to understand what people are going through.
You're facing an opponent that is ensconced in the politics of California and Sacramento, and like you said, has the connections, billionaire connections. A lot of people will say, "Oh, John Cox, that guy's just a big wealthy guy. He just wants to buy an office." You weren't born with a silver spoon in your mouth. You worked your way up. So you started a business, correct? And you grew it to
I
quite
became
a large enterprise?
CPA. I finished college in 2.5 years because I was paying for it. And I got my CPA when I was 20 years old, and I went to work for a big CPA firm, and I went to law school at night, and I started my own business when I was 24. And I started buying apartments before I was 30 years old, and I now have several thousand. I'm the American dream. I mean, I would like to hold up my life. Listen, I've made mistakes over the years, and I have feet of clay like everybody else, but I look at what this country's afforded me in terms of starting at the bottom and working my way up, and I'm so immensely grateful for the opportunities of this country, and I want to make sure that there's other people in this state and in this country who have the same opportunities. I'm not interested in pulling up the ladder on people. Now that I've made it, I want to make sure other people have the chance to make it like I did.
Your parents, if I read correctly, were Democrats. You
Absolutely.
were raised in a Democrat union household.
I was.
How did you switch to becoming more of a free market Republican?
Well, I got into the business world, and I saw firsthand what government did to try to impede operations and growth and the ability of people to start and manage their own businesses. I worked for all these little small businesses, and I could see the travails they had gone through with big government. And I think the ground shifted to some degree. I idolized John F. Kennedy, as did my mom. And remember his famous words in his inauguration: "Ask not what your country can do for you, but what you can do for your country." Was a call to arms for me to say, I'm not looking to get wet nursed by my government. I don't need to have everything paid for by my government. Ask not what your country can do for you. I'm looking to help my community. I'm looking to take responsibility. I'm looking to be involved. And if you look at my background, I hope I've tried to live that. I was a school board president in my parish when I was 27 years old. I started a charity called Rebuilding Together in my community that fixes up the homes of elderly and disabled. I've been associated with the USO for 20 years in Chicago and here, the organization that helps our servicemen and women. So, I've been on boards, Boys Hope, Girls Hope, the American Cancer Society, Restorative Justice Mediation Project. I mean, it's almost too countless to name. I really worked hard to, and live a good life. I mean, I have wonderful children and a great social life, but I've also said I've got to really contribute to my community and give back and take responsibility. To me, being an advocate of big government is the opposite of taking responsibility. I think communities should band together to take responsibility. When we offload all of our responsibilities on some big governmental agency or some big government, I think that detaches us from each other.
I moved to California in 1977. I'm a naturalized immigrant from London, England. My parents moved us here when we were children. And it was just post Ronald Reagan's governorship. Jerry Brown had just come on board. What's happened in the past 40 years in the state of California? Where has that? You talk about self-reliance and independence and getting up by your own bootstraps. What have we been teaching our children the past 4 decades?
To basically rely on government for everything.
How did that happen, though? Where did that switch happen?
Well, people who wanted something from government started realizing that they could fund the campaigns of the people who make those decisions. And that's what our state legislature does every single day. They represent so many people. This state has gotten so large, and the campaigns are now all about 30-second TV ads and radio ads and mass media, that people have really gotten detached from their representatives. And those representatives, in turn, have decided, gee, I need to raise money in order to get elected. I need to, make sure I get these interest groups on my side, or I'm not going to have a chance of getting elected. Therefore, I'm going to do what these interest groups want. And these interest groups are the ones that have really eroded the quality of life in this state. I mean, look at our education system.
Right.
It's in the grip of these interest groups. And I'm not anti-union by any stretch of the imagination. My mom was a card-carrying, picket line walking member of the Chicago Teachers Union. She argued for collective bargaining for higher wages. But there's the line is crossed when those organizations also then dictate who gets elected. That's when the line's crossed. And if you ask me what happened, 30 or 40 years ago, that's really what happened. A lot of these groups figured out that if they banded their money together, they could basically buy the legislation that they wanted, and that is what's led the decline of the state.
We've seen the decline of the state in several different ways. You talk about education. I want to talk with you about affordability. You just toured Skid Row, and you've also toured Gavin Newsom's San Francisco, where you probably were hopping over human defecation on the streets. There's actually now apps that you can download on your phone
I know, isn't that ridiculous?
to tell you where not to walk. How is it that you have a man running for governor who's taken one of the most picturesque, beautiful cities in the world and turned it into a place where you've got needles and human feces on the streets? And I want to get your answer on that as we get into this in more detail here, because we're just coming up for a quick break here. But real quickly, what was your experience downline in Skid Row, just walking amongst folks?
Tragic. My heart was breaking. I mean, Los Angeles as well as San Francisco, beautiful cities that have just been eroded. And it's a lack of diligence, a lack of management by the political leadership. They just haven't addressed the problem, and I hope we get a chance to talk about that.
We will, and we'll be right back with John Cox, Whiskey Politics, Dave Sussman. Thanks. And welcome back, Dave Sussman. I'm delighted to have with us the candidate for Republican governor of the state of California, John Cox. John, you were just saying that you were just down at Skid Row, and also you've toured the streets in San Francisco. Again, coming back to the question on Gavin Newsom, he ran the city into the ground. How does somebody like Gavin Newsom, he's ahead in the polls, although you are tightening very closely here. Yeah. But how does somebody like him have the ability to run an entire state the size of California, the fifth largest in the world as far as GDP?
Well, he can't. I mean, what he's really good at is fundraising, though. Okay. He's running wall-to-wall TV ads on television right now. We're 3 weeks out or so of the election, and he's all about the television, and that's being funded by these interest groups that I just talked about. And of course, they don't want to bring up the mismanagement that he had in San Francisco. You're right. My mom started her life in San Francisco. She lived on Filbert, and I told you my brother was born in San Jose. She remembered San Francisco was lovely. I was just there a week ago. There's just so much, waste on the streets. The streets are filthy. They smell. People are wasting their lives on those streets in many ways too. They're drug users and alcohol abusers, and the management there, their only response is giving them free needles and safe injection sites. I look at it as a tragedy. If my own children were on those streets, the last thing I'd do is give them free needles and a place to shoot up in. I'd get them help. I'd force them to get clean and sober. And you know what? There are wonderful transition centers in other parts of the state. I toured one in Sacramento. There's one in San Diego. We need to devote resources to transitioning these people off the street, make them get sober, train them, teach them, get them back into productive society. Now, it may not work with all of them, but we can really do that with a large number of these people. I will say, too, that a large number of them, especially in the Bay Area, are truly homeless from the standpoint of being forced out of their homes by the lack of affordability. And I hope we get a chance to talk about housing because, I'm in the housing business, and what's going on in the Bay Area, and it's frankly being replicated in other parts of the state, is just criminal in the fact of how we've driven up the cost of building in this state to the point where people just can't afford to live.
It's one of the most important issues, and I want to get very deeply into that with you. But before we move off from Gavin Newsom, I don't want to spend the entire time talking about him, but I understand that you have attempted to have 5 different debates with him.
Yes.
quite frankly, nobody unsuccessfully. You did do a radio debate last week sometime at 10 o'clock on a Monday or a Wednesday morning. Nobody was able to hear it.
It was a non-conversation conversation because we didn't talk about homelessness. We didn't talk about education. We didn't talk about water. We didn't talk about his health care plans. I mean, we didn't talk about his rejection of Prop 13. We didn't talk hardly about the gas tax he supports or the train in the Central Valley that's behind schedule and way over budget. What did we talk about? I mean, we talked about the issues he wanted to hammer me on from 20 years ago, and he didn't want to talk about the problems of today.
Why was he afraid to debate you? Why you should? This is California. You should be on stage.
Answer. He's been in politics for 16 years. A lot of this decline in California that you and I just talked about has happened on his watch. He's been in public life since the late 90s, 20 years. And it hasn't gotten better. As a matter of fact, as we talked about with San Francisco, it's gotten worse. It's not gotten better.
Right.
So the idea that this guy would be promoted to be the leader of this state is just mind-boggling to me. And obviously, in this situation, it's a function of name recognition. I've got to get known, and he's already known. And I hope the people out there who are listening to this become informed. Take a look at what his record is. Take a look at what I've done in 40 years in business and make your own decisions.
I'm just going to ask you, I'm not asking you to put yourself in his head, but why hasn't he wanted to debate? Why has his team prevented this from happening?
What's he going to say? He's been there for 16 years while the cost of a house is going up way out of sight for most middle-class people.
Yeah.
He's been there for 16 years and the homeless problem's gotten worse. He's been there for 16 years and the water, we're talking about water rationing in this state. People aren't going to be able to take a bath in this state in 3 years.
Yeah.
He's been there for 16 years and they haven't done anything about that. We're living in fear of forest fires and mudslides that, frankly, are a lack of management of our forests, not climate change. They've driven up the cost of electricity so that it's twice what people are paying in other states. Our gasoline prices are way higher than everybody else in the country. You look all the way down the list at all the issues that make life so much more difficult for people in California than they should be. What is he going to say? He can't say anything about it except that, I'll keep working on trying to get it fixed. Well, where have you been for 16 years? You haven't done a darn thing to get these things fixed.
Do you think it's just that the state of California will put a D in office no matter who they are, and he's kind of riding in on that?
I hope not. I mean, I hope people stop looking at party labels and partisanship and just focus on what works. I want to get the job done. I don't care if I get a solution from a Democrat. I mean, that'd be wonderful. I'm open to that. I really am. I grew up a Democrat. I don't have any bad feelings. But the point is, let's go with what works. What I know doesn't work is putting politicians in charge of our education system. Mm-hmm. We used to be the number one education system in the country in California. Number one. And what are we now? 47th? Half of our public school children can't read to grade level? Is that acceptable to the people of this state? I certainly hope not, because I'll tell you what, we're paying for it in our prisons. It's costing $80,000 a year in our prisons to house each of our prisoners. We could send them to Harvard for less money, and that's the result of an education system that's failed us. That has got to change, and I'm committed to getting that done.
In our next section, I want to get into affordability real quickly here. Talk about your housing background real quickly.
I build apartments for a living. That's what I do. In Indiana, I can build a wonderful apartment for $90,000. It's $450,000 here in Los Angeles. What accounts for that difference? I'm telling you right now, by the way, it's not the land. The land cost maybe be a $30,000 difference on an apartment. It's government red tape, government taxes, government-fostered lawsuits, government mandates, government delays in getting things done. A lot of that is on the state level as well, and it needs to be changed because we've driven up the cost of housing and cost of building here so much that people just can't afford the rent. They can't afford their mortgage. I mean, they've given up on the idea that they're ever going to be able to afford a house. That's the American dream, Dave. I mean,
right.
What are we doing if we have a whole young population that sits there and is just giving up a dream?
We're going to get very heavily into this in this next section. It's one of the most important issues of the day. We'll be right back with John Cox, Whiskey Politics, at Ricochet and America's Voice News. And back with John Cox, running for California governor on the Republican ticket here with us at Whiskey Politics. John, California has one of the highest poverty rates in the entire country. We're seeing people having to move from the cities, basically anything within 20 miles of the strip of the ocean. I had Victor Davis Hanson on recently, and he talked about California being 2 states.
Absolutely.
Okay, you got folks in the Central Valley who are paying $100 to $200 a square foot for a home. You go to San Francisco, Los Angeles, San Diego, it's $1,000 a square foot. What can be done about pricing and affordability in the state of California from a government perspective?
Well, the last thing we should do is float more bonds and hand out subsidies. That's my opponent's answer. Because all that does is it institutionalizes the high cost of building. It's the cost of building that has driven up the cost of housing. Mm-hmm. Yes, it's supply and demand, but that's directly related to the fact of the cost of building that's gone up so much. And as I enumerated, it's lawsuits, red tape, delays, impact fees, mandates. All of these things are imposed by government. It's not the cost of the land. It is all of these issues. So my opponent comes up with 15 different plans. He's going to do this subsidy, he's going to do this incentive, and he's going to do this thing and this thing. And he never addresses what's really in the cost of each home. In the cost of each home, you've got lumber, windows, roofing, all those things are in the cost of a home, right? Mm-hmm. Well, they're no different here in California, or not much different. They might be a little higher priced than in Indiana, where I build, okay? I'm actually in the building business. I know what I'm talking about here.
Is this commercial real estate, residential real
apartments.
estate?
I build apartments.
Okay.
I build apartments.
So multi-units.
Multifamily units. Mm-hmm. And I'm telling you, a multifamily unit where I build in Indiana is $90,000. It's $450,000, $500,000 here. And I've talked to the builders. I've actually sat down and I can speak their language. I know exactly what's going into the cost of building here.
Well, folks that are listening to this, they're going to say, and I know you've already addressed this, but get into this a little bit more detail. They're going to say, yes, because it's more expensive to live in California because of the land.
No. An acre of land in Indiana is about $100,000 an acre. Here, I've researched it. It's about $1 million an acre. Big difference, right?
Huge.
If you divide that by 30 units to the acre, which is what I build in Indiana, and it's typical of what you might build, that means that land cost is $3,000 a unit in Indiana, okay? It's $30,000 a unit in California, 10 times, right? Mm-hmm. That doesn't account for a $370,000 or $360,000 difference in the cost of building, does it? That's only $30,000 of that $360,000. What's the other $330,000 difference in cost? It's lawsuits. It's taxes. I've talked to builders who tell me in some areas of the state there's impact fees of $100,000 a unit or more. Mm-hmm. That's local governments looking at housing as a way to finance their operations, okay? And maybe it's because they're having to pay so much into CalPERS, and maybe because CalPERS is so mismanaged, that's why they're doing that.
Right.
Either way, it's ending up in the cost of building an apartment, which ends up in the cost of your rent. So what are the other costs? The mandates, solar panels are now mandated. All these environmental mandates, all the delays. I got properties approved in Indiana in 6 months. I've had builders tell me it's 12 years in California to get a property approved so they can build apartments.
Okay,
so this is ridiculous.
This leads me into a question, because you obviously have solutions and you want to reduce regulatory, you want to reduce taxes and tax the burden.
We've got to reform CEQA.
Okay.
Yeah.
But this leads to a question actually from a Ricochet member. His name is Judge Mental. He says, how can a governor accomplish when the opposite has supermajorities in the legislature?
Okay, very good question. I get that everywhere. And that is, I first of all have control of the executive branch, so I'll do what I can with that power. I also have the line item veto, remember. But let's face it, at the end of the day, that reader is absolutely right. I've got to change this legislature, and I have a plan. I have a reform plan for changing this legislature. Newsom has no plan. He likes the current system. They're the people that are funding his TV ads. He likes putting those people in power. I'm going to take the special interests out of power. I have a reform plan to do that. I'm going to be governor. I'm going to sell that to the people of the state once I'm governor. And I'm not going to get into it now because it's just, a little bit more complicated than, we could talk about in the context of this conversation. But I am committed to reforming the way this legislature is run. It is not being run for us right now. Our legislature represents those interest groups. It does not represent the people.
Okay. Another issue, big issue in the state of California is water rights. And,
big issue.
And you've got forest fires all over the place that are happening. You've got Orville Dam, which is going to need how much to fix?
It's over $1 billion has been spent already. It's almost done being fixed. If they'd applied real repair principles to that, it would have cost maybe $20-30 million to do the right repairs over time. But because they didn't do that, they let the thing get really in bad shape, and it's now over $1 billion.
One of the common questions that people are asking me to ask you, I know it's on everybody's mind, is why are we letting all of this natural rainwater flow out into the ocean, the Sacramento Delta smelt, and all of this is being protected when we're water rationing? And there's a new law that was just passed, correct? Do you want to talk about water ration?
In May, Jerry Brown signed a law that imposed water rationing in the year 2022. That's how cynical these guys are, by the way. They make these laws effective way in the future so that people don't notice them.
There's no accountability.
Yeah, there's no accountability then. But in the year 2022, our water use, indoor use now, this is indoor use, is going to be cut in half, basically cut in half, which means you're not going to be able to take a bath. I mean, a typical bathtub is 50, 60, 70 gallons. You're going to be limited to 55 gallons a day under this new water rationing scheme. And you're right. We're pushing so much water into the Pacific. We get tons of snow. We live right next to one of the greatest mountain ranges in the country, the Sierra Nevadas. They produce incredible amounts of snow and incredible amounts of snow melt, but we're letting a large amount of that flow into the Pacific. I understand there's some reasons to do that because we want to make sure that fish have a way of spawning and surviving. No question. You can do both. What we've done, though, is we've turned over our legislature to people who are absolutist, who to them the perfect is the enemy of the good is their byword because they are interested in absolute perfection. I mean, a lot of them would probably like it if there were no people in California. I mean, to them, people foul the environment.
So what's the solution?
The solution, a balance. Look at the advantages of making sure we have enough water for agriculture. California is the soup, the nut and fruit and vegetable bowl of the world, let alone the United States. We need water for agriculture. We obviously need water for our population. So let's have a balance. Let's capture a good amount of that water, but let's also make sure that the southern part of the state, which is where I live in San Diego. It's a coastal desert. I like that. Let's do more desalination down there. Let's do more recycling down there.
That's what they do in Israel.
That's what they do in Israel. Read the book Let There Be Water by Seth Siegel. Great book. I've read it cover to cover. We should be doing that down in the coastal desert areas, but we should also make sure that we keep a lot of that rainfall and that snow melt there. So, it's a balancing process. But, the trouble with the absolutists is that it's easier to raise money from people when you're an absolutist.
Yeah.
And that's what's happened. They're all ideologues that are there running this show, and I'm not an ideologue. I'm interested in getting things done.
One of the most important things that I see, I'm a father of two, I've got a son that's about to go to college, is education. I recently saw California is ranked at 46th in the country.
Near the bottom, yep.
Right?
Near the bottom.
And so you look at that and you think to yourself, it's got the highest taxes in the country, and it's got the lowest education. How did that happen?
And And here's the lie, by the way, too, and that is, Jerry Brown has increased education spending by 80% since he's been in office, and the results have gone nowhere but down. Now, all we heard before was we need more money to throw at education. But you know what? I've learned this from the business world. You can't cure a mismanaged structure by just throwing more money at it. You're going to make it worse, frankly. You've got to revise the structure. You've got to revisit how you're doing things. And that rarely has been done in our education system. It's still being administered the same way. And the same political parties are in control of it. Most of that extra money did not get in the classroom.
Where did it go? Unions? Where?
Administrators. Administrators to a large degree, and prior pensions, frankly, that they had underfunded for many years.
CalPERS is a major problem.
CalPERS and CalSTRS.
Okay.
I mean, they're both major problems.
Yeah.
I've said that Jerry Brown and Gavin Newsom should be occupying the cell next to Bernie Madoff. They've been lying to the people of the state for a long time about these pension issues. But we need to get more money into the classroom. We need to treat teachers like professionals. They are professionals. My mom was a professional. We treat them like lockstep, total security union personnel, and frankly, I want them treated like rock stars and baseball players. I want there to be a bidding war for teachers. In order to have a bidding war for teachers, you've got to have a system where the parents are in charge, where the parents have options. That's what creates a bidding war.
You talk about choice?
Choice.
Yeah.
I'm a CPA and I'm a lawyer. I don't need a union to represent me. There's a bidding war for my services. I put out an hourly rate, and people pay it to get my services. I want that to be the case with teachers. I want there to be a bidding war. I want teachers to get compensated on how professional they are and how well they do their job. And I think that's been lost in this whole education structure.
So the left, and Gavin Newsom says this, but he isn't the only one. This has been tried again and again every election cycle, is that you just want to take money out of the classrooms. You're going to hurt the teachers and it's nurses. And how do you have that argument as with adults who want to learn the differences between the two candidates?
They ought to go back to the old Soviet Union then to see top-down centralized management where people got a little stipend and they were happy with that. That's not what America's all about. America's about merit. We're a meritocracy. We're about doing the better job and getting paid better because we do a better job. That's what has advanced the standard of living in America. That's why we have cell phones and personal computers and airplanes that go 600 miles an hour and wonderful conveniences in our lives, because people who do a better job get paid more to do a better job. That improves our quality of life. Well, that's totally inapposite to people that believe in socialism or Marxism or other forms of economies that are different than what we have. We have capitalism in this country, and freedom and liberty and meritocracies, and that's what's provided the wonderful advantages that America has. People like Gavin Newsom want to take us back to the old Soviet Union. They should look at Venezuela as an example. I mean,
they don't want to talk about Venezuela, but we will be talking about this. We will be talking about the sanctuary state and the gas tax right after this. We'll be right back with John Cox. And Dave Sussman back with you. We are delighted to have John Cox with us. He's going through a lot of different issues here about the state of California and the upcoming election on November the 6th. There is a proposition, number 6, for those folks in California. They've seen all the advertising about it, and that's to repeal a gas tax that was pushed through by the legislature without the vote of California voters. Is that correct?
Absolutely, and it will be repealed, despite the interest group spending $40 million now to try to keep it in place. The people who are advancing the repeal have a fraction of that, and I think the repeal is going to win.
So let me ask you from a standpoint of two questions. Number one, what has the impact of raising taxes? You pay $4 a gallon here in the state of California. You can go across to I take my son to Arizona or something. It's $2 or $2.40 a gallon, right?
Right.
It's so what has that impact had on working people?
It's had a horrible impact on working people. I mean, I've talked to people all over the state, these forgotten Californians who basically can't fill their tank of gas. I mean, they've got to choose between buying food and buying more gasoline. I mean, that's a ridiculous choice to have to make in this state, and it's being foisted on them by Gavin Newsom and the political class. I mean, this has happened on his watch, and he's in favor of this gas tax increase. I mean, and why? He gets driven everywhere. That's why. He's the lieutenant governor. He doesn't have to worry about filling up his tank. The taxpayers are paying for his gasoline. But people out there are really struggling. And I mentioned it before. They're having to move farther and farther away from their job in order to find an apartment or a house, and then they get hit with this gas tax. That's why it's so, disconcerting to people, and they're so angry about it. It's why that state senator was repealed, even though the cronies and the interest groups spent millions to try to keep him in office. He lost by 20 points because people said, this is ridiculous. We're not putting up with this.
You think that will serve you well in the election?
I certainly do. I mean, I think people are sick of, but it's not just the gas tax I'm running on. It's also the schools, the water, the crappy condition of the roads, frankly. I mean,
well, that's what Gavin Newsom would say. He would say, but we need that money to fix the roads.
And he would be right that we need to fix the roads, but we don't need the money to do that because Caltrans is very inefficient. The first thing I do as governor is I audit Caltrans because a lot of people have done outside analysis of Caltrans and have discovered they've got 3,500 extra positions. Senator John Morlack came up with that. No contest to what he said, by the way. 3,500 extra positions that we're funding. And remember, it's not just the salaries on those positions. It's also their pensions, their health care costs, everything else. That's waste. That's inefficiency. But see, here's the problem, Dave. The politicians like Newsom don't want to fix that problem. They don't want to make, do away with those positions. They don't want to drive a harder bargain with contractors who work for Caltrans because they're also contributors to his campaigns, right? They're supporters of his. So he doesn't want to drive a hard bargain with them and get a better deal for the taxpayers. That's why it was easier for them to raise the tax than to try to clean up Caltrans. I'm going to clean up Caltrans. I'm going to audit every penny that goes into there, along with audits of the DMV, along with an audit of the train out in the Central Valley, along with audits of our prison system. Everything, as far as I'm concerned, in this state is going to be audited. We're going to know where every single penny goes, and we're going to make sure that we run this operation lean and mean. We get the job done. We're going to make sure we get results, but we're not going to waste one penny when I'm the governor of the state.
Last question for you. This is probably more of a national question from the standpoint of other cities and states being impacted by this policy, but California took the lead. Sanctuary state, sanctuary cities. Talk about, first of all, your feeling about it and what the Trump Justice Department is doing with the state and what your intentions would do.
Politicians like Newsom don't want to solve this problem. I mean, they really don't. They like it as a political issue. I'm done treating people like pawns like he does. I want to fix this problem, and I'll work with the federal government. They're in charge of immigration, okay? But the sanctuary state policy is opposed by every single sheriff in the state except for a couple in San Francisco area. And that's political, as you know. The reason the sheriffs don't like this is because it really ties their hands. And we don't want that. We want law enforcement to work together. Listen, every country is allowed to have borders. We have a problem because the country to the south is not very well governed, and it had 26,000 murders last year. I, for one, don't want those guns and drugs and human traffickers coming across that border. So we need to make sure that they're protected. Newsom wants to use this as a political issue. He wants to fight Washington on this score. He wants to make this election here all about a fight with Washington. I'm not interested in those kinds of fights. I'm interested in solving the problem and getting results. I believe we need more immigration to this country. I don't want us to be Japan, which has limited immigration. But I also want to know that people, who people are that are coming in this country. I also want people to walk in the front door and not walk in the back door.
What impact is it having on the infrastructure of California?
Well, there's a whole lot of additional costs that are associated with all this, and it's a real issue, and frankly, our crime rate's gone up. I mean, you got to look at Los Angeles and San Francisco, especially. San Francisco, which my opponent used to be the mayor of, is now the nationwide leader in property crimes. Number one among all large cities in property crimes, and Los Angeles isn't far behind. I sat down with LAPD on the Skid Row tour, and I tell you what, they're beaten up on this, and they want an answer to it.
We're finishing up here. Folks can find you online where?
JohnCoxForGovernor.com. We are raising money. We are raising awareness. We have gotten a lot of people that are more interested now.
What's your plan in the final couple of weeks here?
I'm going all around the state. We're going to do a Help Is on the Way bus tour in the last 5 days. We're doing interviews like this all across the state. We're doing gas tax rallies around the state.
You just came from one, didn't you?
I just came from one here in Los Angeles. There's another one in Riverside this evening. I'm doing one in San Jose on Sunday. We're doing them all over the state, and people are really surging. They're really finally starting to pay attention to this race. I mean, Californians typically do that. They wait until the last minute. They wait until the last 2 weeks to really flesh out who they're going to vote for.
Well, folks, everybody follow John Cox. Go to his website, johncox.com. Is it johncox.com?
JohnCoxForGovernor.com.
JohnCoxForGovernor.com.
FOR. JohnCoxForGovernor.com.
And we'll be watching very closely. Best of luck with the election, and hopefully when you're governor, we can have you back on again.
I will be everywhere. No question about it.
Thank you so much. And folks, continue to find us at America's Voice News. You can find our YouTube channel as well. Subscribe, and also find us at ricochet.com and all of your podcast applications. Very special thanks to John Cox for joining us today, and we'll be back again very soon at Whiskey Politics.